Another aspect of text analysis is to look at the same text from different angles to extract different kinds of meaning from it. In this segment, we'll see how to use WordSeer to get those different angles. Remember the data set we're working with here. It's a collection of all the New York Times editorials about China and Japan published over the last 30 years. So from the 80s right up to 2012. That's around 5,000 articles. Let's continue our line of investigation from the previous segment. There, we were looking at how perceptions of China have evolved over the last 30 years, and we compared the frequent phrases and frequent words in the 3 different decades. One of the things we found was that words like economic and world seem to increase in frequency over time in sentences containing China. Let's use WordSeer to investigate that further by showing how it can be used to compare not just different data side by side, but different views of the same data. This time, let's start with one of those increasing words we found, economic. So, by default, WordSeer selects the word tree visualization. There are other options, but we don't have to pick one right away. We can do that later. So this is the word tree for economic. And let me filter that to just editorials about China using the metadata pane. But now, what if I want just the plain old list of sentences? Do I have to open up a new panel, search, and then filter? That doesn't make any sense. Surely the data is the same, I just want a different view of it. WordSeer lets you do that with this drop-down menu here, on the top left of every panel, which you may already have noticed. These let you access different views of the same data. So the breadcrumbs say country, China, and economic. What this widget will do is allow me to switch between different visualizations of the sentences that match that. So look at the options here. So if I select list of search results here, that's what I'll get. I'll get the same sentences, except instead of a word tree of those sentences, I'll just get a list of them, like that. It's the same data, just visualized differently. Let's look at the other options. The next one is slightly different. It's documents with matches. This opens up a list of all the documents that have matching sentences to these criteria. Editorials about China that have sentences with the word economic in them. Like that. See, they all have the same breadcrumbs. In this case, the documents are the editorials and some data about the editorials themselves, like the year and the month and the subject. There's another option here, grammatical search bar charts, which we'll deal with in the next video. So this last one is the most interesting, and I've saved it for last. It's another interactive visualization, and it'll show you how your data is distributed across the categories you have. So let's try that out with the editorials, but first let's make some space by closing out all these other panels. So that's the word frequencies panel. So the breadcrumbs are exactly the same, country China and a search for economic. Now look how it shows me its distribution across month and year and country. Of course, but that's just China because I filtered the sentences to just China. So let's remove that filter and explore this visualization a bit. This is what we see now. There's 2 countries now, China and Japan. We get to visually compare their frequencies. The frequency with which economic happens over time and in the editorials about these 2 countries. Remember I said this graph was interactive? Well, that's because you can filter it in multiple dimensions in real time. Let's first hide the month graph because it's not that interesting. Okay, so see what I mean here. If I select a date range for economic, look at how the counts for China and Japan change as I drag it around. They correspond to the counts from just that time span. But obviously these counts don't mean much by themselves. There are way more articles about China than Japan in general, and who knows how many were published in each decade, so these variations could just be noise. So that's why we have this normalize button. If I click it, it'll divide the counts by the total number of articles about China and the total number of articles about Japan, and show me the percents instead. And I can compare those. See, once I click it, I'm seeing percents. And the year graph also changes to percent. So that means this percent of editorials in this year mentioned economic. So now we can do even more interesting things, which is compare the trends for the different countries. I click on China to filter the data to just the editorials for China, and the year graph changes. So that's got a particular trend over time. And now if we click Japan instead, we get the editorials about Japan, and that's got a very different trend over time. So with these two views, you can at once see these collection-wide trends and also, side by side, look at the individual sentences. But the word frequency views has features I haven't covered yet, like the ability to do multiple simultaneous searches. So you may remember one of the other words that showed an increasing trend in the articles about China over the years was world. There were only 98 in the 80s, but by the 2000s there were 509. That's a huge increase. Let's see what that looks like next to economic. So now I've done a search for world, and look how it's appeared next to economic. There are two breadcrumbs now, the blue one for economic and the orange one for the new search world. So here they are, stacked on top of each other, economic in blue and world in orange. But that's actually what the stacked checkbox is for. It unstacks them so you can compare them side by side if you want, or if you recheck it, it'll restack them. And I can still filter, for example, just China and see what these two look like over time, stacked and unstacked. And the trends look very different. And so now you see how you can use WordSeer to do these simple yet powerful analysis. Simple because, hey, this is something that's quote-unquote a well-known fact, how China went from being merely a developing country to an economic and world power. In the next segment, we'll see how to use the special features of WordSeer to explore the grammatical structure of a collection.